I'd like to welcome you to the second of a series of presentations designed to help freshmen and beginning students to make the most of their college careers. There are a lot of differences between high school and college. Newspapers the past week, I've noted one. Earlier in the week, I understand a student down at one of the Indianapolis high schools was expelled for growing a mustache. I think they got that problem worked out. And then this morning I saw in the paper, Indianapolis paper, that out in Pasadena, a high school teacher was expelled or removed from service for his beard. I don't think we quite have that problem here in college or in any college. I hope that the differences, though, between high school and college are a little more substantive than this kind of superficial difference. Somewhere in J.D. Salinger's little book, Franny and Zooey, Franny makes a complaint that in her college, this doesn't happen to be Ball State, it's a New England school, in her college, no one ever says anything about wisdom. There's a great deal of talk about knowledge and the professor's role in it. Not much said about wisdom, and she's lamenting this kind of thing. In the little book, Introduction to College Life, we tried to make some point of the relation of the professor to the idea of wisdom and what it bears on knowledge, and used the quotation, which some of you may remember, from the Lebanese philosopher Khalil Gibran. Runs something like this: if a teacher is indeed wise, he does not bid you enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. We think this is basically the function of the college professor in relationship to relating knowledge to wisdom, but they differ a great deal in the way they go about this. And so we have a panel today that is going to dress itself in terms of what they expect of the college student. Before introducing that group, though, I'd like to make 2 points to you. The first one has to do with the little pamphlet given you. You may have encountered in your residence halls or among friends some suggestions already of how to take notes, how to make use of the books you have. If you haven't had a chance to look through this while you're waiting here, I think you'll find some rather good suggestions for you in your study habits. The second point I'd like to make has to do with next week's presentation. We're talking about differences between high school and college. One of the differences, you probably noted if you've been in the library here, and I'm sure you have, that the scope of offerings and services greatly differs here from the experience you had in high school. Your instructors will expect you to know about the library and to make full use of it. Next week, you'll have an opportunity to meet the librarian of the college and some of her staff. You'll have an opportunity to learn more about the services that you don't now know about. They plan to make use of a little film to help in that kind of presentation. It's a part of this whole vast reservoir of knowledge about the college that we think you ought to know, and you ought to know it before it's too late. So we hope to see you next week at this time. Now turning back to today's presentation. What does the faculty expect of the college student? To answer this question, we have a distinguished panel of professors, and I note that one dean has slipped in there some way. They're led by Dr. Duane Diedrich of the English department. At this time, he will introduce his panel and tell you about the procedure that they will follow. Dr. Diedrich?
Thank you, Dean Lawhead. Our procedure today, I would almost say the panel outnumbers the audience today. What do you have?
That's not quite true.
It's not quite true?
No.
Our procedure today will be to have the panel members make an opening presentation, 3 or 4 minutes, perhaps discussing very generally what the faculty expects from the students, or specifically if they wish. And then we'll try to get at some of the specifics. And I think that we'll change our procedure here a little bit if there isn't an objection, and we'll pose the question after you make your introductory comments. Try to find a single antipathy that you have in terms of things that students do that you just do not like in the classroom, that you are opposed to. Okay, is that all right? Any objections? Okay. Our panel members then are Dr. Sutton on my far left. Dr. Sutton's a professor in the Department of English. Next is Dr. Easton, associate professor in the art department. On my right is Dr. Carson Bennett, associate professor of education. And the next gentleman is Dean Bell, dean of the Division of Fine and Applied Arts. Our first speaker then today will be Dr. Sutton.
Oh, well, of course, like everybody else in this civilization, I learned most of what I know from television, and I learned from there. Well, that's right. Oh, I wish you wouldn't laugh while I'm talking, but anyway, go ahead if you want to. Just once, but yeah. Anyway, I learned from television that you expect more and you get it. Perhaps you have heard the evening news or something of that sort, and you've heard that line. Well, I hope that's true, because it didn't used to be up until, say 5 minutes ago. That hasn't been the way it's been going. We expected a lot, and we didn't always get it. But I think it is an excellent idea to give you some notion as to what we expect, because the average college student, as I have experienced him and have been one of them, doesn't think very much about what the college is for or what he's supposed to do, except that there are certain courses that you may want to take or may have to take, and you are supposed to pass them somehow. And it's sort of like having a combination on a lock. You do certain things. You don't know why you're doing them, but you do certain things, and then you get a grade, and you get to stay in college, or possibly they will suggest that there might be other places that you could spend your time, whether more profitably or not. So I'd like to suggest one or two answers, and I think that you'll find that the answers, at least as specifics, will vary a lot with the individual professor. I think our discussion here will show that. We're all really referring you back to what the college catalog says, and if you haven't read the college catalog, do let me suggest that, because it does have a certain information relevant to the school, and you might even find it useful. I'll say two things, though. One of them is that you ought to be here to learn something. There is an old saying, where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise, but I think you will find that it is not foolish to be knowledgeable. Sometimes you can learn things that you don't like, but you'd be a lot worse off if you didn't know them in the long run. So you really ought to be trying to know more than you did before. This might sound like a rather obvious piece of information, but just this morning in a leisure moment I was looking through the Ball State News, and I read a paragraph or two by the editor of the paper, who said that he was able to tell from the comments of some students here that Ball State had the reputation among some people of being the best fun college in the Middle West, which I think must be the person who decided that must be an idiot. But we do get a few idiots in here, you see, who don't pay any attention to what the school is for, but think that the reason you come to college is for fun, fun, fun. And I certainly would suggest there are quite a few other places to be better equipped to supply that commodity, but that is what some people thought. The story, in case you didn't read it in the paper, is that he found there was somebody from Connecticut here, and he thought that was a long way for someone to come, and he said, "How come you're here?" He said, "Oh, there's 5 or 6 of us, and we've decided that Ball State is the best place to have fun." Well, I hope they fail dismally. In more ways than one. We don't need people like that here. We should have enjoyment, but it should be a kind of superficial sugarcoating to the basic job, which is really to work. And to work for what? Well, millions of dollars are spent by the unsuspecting taxpayers of this state on this school. And by unsuspecting, I mean that the way taxes are collected, there's quite a gulf between the collection and the spending, and there are just lots of people whose money is spent on Ball State who hardly know that Ball State exists or couldn't care less, and have certainly no idea what the function of the school is. And in my opinion, the only true function of a school supported by taxpayers is to make a positive contribution to the life of the community. so that sooner or later, if you really belong here, you should begin to think of yourself as being trained for some kind of leadership which will improve society. And that's a good deal of a long way from fun. Now, I hope you do enjoy your college life, but I hope that you sooner or later realize that it's very serious business, supported to a considerable extent by your fellow citizens of Indiana. I think that's enough for the moment.
Thank you, Dr. Sutton. I enjoyed your concept there of fun. It reminds me of a series of aptitude tests I encountered recently, and it seems that the aptitude demonstrated on some of the tests was for retirement. And I think that might describe some of our students, as their aptitude is best suited for retirement. They don't do it on a voluntary basis. I have a feeling that there'll be some classes that will put it on a rather formal basis. Dr. Easton.
Well, a number of the things that I expect from a Ball State student, you already have. You come with this standard equipment. I expect you to have a sense of purpose, and I think you have that. I think you understand the premium put on an education and the need to be educated. I think you are aware of the role of personal grooming, not only as a matter of personal pride, but as a matter of social happiness, and the necessity for a certain amount of fundamental courtesy. These things, in most cases, have been taken care of through a careful bringing up, which I think shows. Another thing I like is your youthful expectation of getting what you came for. You expect the best, and this is an enviable attitude. When you get a little older, sometimes you don't always expect to get what you came for. Now, the things that I think you might have to work on a little bit are these. One, I like the idea of the open mind. I don't believe in coming here in order to re-entrench what are already firmly established biases. I think when you come here to defend what you already have a bias about, and you think that that's more important than illuminating your life with great ideas, I think this might be a mistake. I like to see the doors and the windows of the mind open, so ideas can sail in, be considered and weighed and either accepted or rejected, however you respond to it at the present time. Aristotle had a view on what are already firmly established biases. I think when you come here to defend what you already have a bias about, and you think that that's more important than illuminating your life with great ideas, I think this might be a mistake. I like to see the doors and the windows of the mind open, so ideas can sail in, be considered and weighed and either accepted or rejected, however you respond to it at the present time. Aristotle had a view on all this. He called it broad intellectualism. He felt that instead of hanging on to everything so tightly, what Plato calls positivism or absolutism, if we relax a little and hold some of our beliefs in abeyance, like a chip floating on the sea, that there's a security in this kind of thing as well as the absolutism, but it's more subject to change, it's more subject to freshness, to new thoughts, to mutation. And I look for this in the classroom. I can't get to you, I can't help you if the door is closed. You have to let me in. So I like to see this. I like to see the mind I like to see the mind aware and open and awake, and the candles going. I also, being an art person, I run into people who take a course in art because it's compulsory, and they have some doubts about their own ability, about their own skill in art. I firmly believe that no matter what ability you have, I can improve it. In fact, I have proven this many times. And so I'm asked, do you give credit for trying? If I just come in and try, do I get some credit for that? I'm afraid my answer to that is no. I don't give you credit for washing your face, for combing your hair, putting your clothes on, or getting to class. I expect that, and I expect you to try. I don't give you any credit for trying. On the other hand, I penalize you if you don't try. Seems a little unfair, doesn't it? Well, that's the way it works. And the other question is, what if I don't have any talent? Well, this is a question that people don't seem to apply to science or math or geography or history. People have talents in all these lines, and art is just another line which you may or may not have talent. You have to work with what you have. If you are less than someone else in class, I can't penalize that other person. I can't penalize the talented. One of the things, I'm sure wherever you are, as I said before, you can come along further. And I look for this spirit and this attitude of willingness to work and hopefulness for improvement. Those are the main things I look for.
Thank you, Dr. Easton. Dr. Bennett.
It seems to me that there are a couple of things that I expect from students, or put differently, that I would be happy if students achieved in my classes or in classes in the area in which I teach. And the first of these, I think, is perhaps illustrated by a fable, which I shall read you in a moment, which I'm sure the panel is tired of hearing. Illustrated better than I can perhaps express it myself. The fable goes like this. The fable concerns destiny. Destiny came down to an island centuries ago and summoned 3 of the inhabitants before him. What would you do, asked Destiny, if I told you that tomorrow this island would be completely inundated by an immense tidal wave? The first man, who was a cynic, said, "Why, I would eat and drink and carouse and make love all night long." The second man, who was a mystic, said, "I would go to the sacred grove with my loved ones and make sacrifices to the gods and pray without ceasing." And the third man, who loved reason, thought for a while, confused and troubled, and said, "Why, I would assemble our wisest men and begin at once to study how to live underwater." Now, I'd like to suggest to you that it seems to me that one of the outcomes of a college education ought to be this kind of attitude, that when confronted by difficulties or by a problem, that you begin at once to study what to do, how to live under that particular set of conditions. And the other part of this, it seems to me, is that college ought to enable you to become more committed to the notion that when you are faced with a difficulty, that the best ways of resolving the difficulty are to consider the alternatives, to consider the evidence there is connected with each alternative, to reason about it, to draw some conclusions, and to act as best you can on that basis. Now, there's another part of this first expectation I'd like to spell out in a little more detail, and it's this. One of the things that I seem to hear from students, and I hear from other people, and I'm sure you hear from people, is, well, whenever you talk about a social problem or a personal problem, well, it's too bad. It's a real shame, but that's the way things are. The implication being, that's just how things are paired, there's nothing we can do about it. And it seems to me that too infrequently, or that too frequently rather, when we're faced with dilemmas, we don't experience these as choice situations. And I think we don't keep in mind that there are in all situations alternatives, that there are different things that can be done, always almost always not just either or, but a whole set of things that can be done. And it seems to me that one of the things that college ought to do for us education is to enable us to experience life more fundamentally as choice, and choice making in the terms I've mentioned. The second thing is that if this attitude is developed, that this approach is taken to life's dilemmas, be they personal or social, that these should be used. And whether the problem confronting one is one's choice of a marriage partner, or whether the problem confronting us as a society is a problem of overpopulation, and I guess the two are connected, aren't they, if you follow out a little bit, whether the problem is the first or the second, that we approach it in the same way. And it seems to me that if we look at what we do as individuals, as a society, that we too frequently do one of two things. We deny that there is a problem. A good illustration of this is overpopulation. We refuse to accept the fact that this is indeed a problem. Or we run away from the problem. Example, the downtowns of our major cities are becoming real problems, centers of high rates of delinquency, among other things. The solution of most of us is to move out of town into the suburbs or into the exurbs and leave this. Now, it seems to me these two things, one, this particular attitude in approaching problems, and secondly, this commitment to using it, are important expectations.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. Dean Bell.
Well, may I begin my remarks by adding my hearty agreement to what the other gentlemen have just said, and then may I turn to the more or less mundane details having to do with kinds of questions that I think you might have in your minds, or that you will have in your minds. What does the professor expect of you? Well, let me say we cannot categorize this in any simple way. These people are all different. For example, one professor may assume that his job is to provide the instruction. He simply assumes that you're there to learn, and if you don't choose to, that's all right with him, probably too bad for you. Another is a very excitable person, one who is much interested in high motivation, and so he gives you the works to give you every reason he can think of why you ought to learn. Obviously, you behave differently in the two kinds of situations. There are those who will state specifically what they require. And I'd say to you, those who do, you'd probably better listen. For example, if a teacher says to you, I expect your problems or your written assignments turned in every day, you'd better be ready to do that, because that's a part of his way of doing and a part of his evaluation. You'll have others who will say, I give 2 examinations. My evaluation is based upon the examinations. Well, what I'm trying to say to you then is, one of your jobs is to evaluate your professor. Attempt to find out all you can about him. Study carefully what he says, and if given the opportunity to ask what his expectations are, ask. This is the best source of information that you have. What generally do we expect from you as students? I think Dr. Sutton made the point at the beginning that we simply assume that you came here for an education. This isn't always true, but we assume that. We suspect there are many things for which you came. Sororities, fraternities, athletics, having a good time, maybe looking for a husband or looking for a wife, but these are all incidental, really, to the problem of education. And as professors and in your classes, we assume that this is your number one commitment, and it takes priority over anything else so far as the use of your time is concerned. Now, this you should know. This you should accept as a philosophy on the campus. Now, assuming then that you are both willing and desiring to learn, we have the first step in a somewhat different process from what you have had before. In high school, you had to attend until you were 16, and to have any kind of social prestige at all, you had to graduate. In college, we don't have to assume anything like this. This is a privilege, and you earn the right to enjoy the privilege. In the matter of preparation, we expect when assignments are given that you prepare regularly and punctually. It isn't good to say, well, I'll delay a day or two on this paper or on being ready for this next lecture. In fact, you probably get your own penalty from it, because without that preparation, you're not really ready for the next day's work, even to understand adequately perhaps the lecture that is to be given. This we expect. Now, you've already distinguished yourself, in my mind, to a certain degree. I would wager that if we were to measure this morning the caliber of the students here, we'd find it's considerably above the average of the class. And I say that because apparently you've had some reason to believe there's something for you to get from this series of discussions. And there are those that would not attend anything that they didn't think they had to. You've already set yourself up a bit above the total group of which you are a part. You will continue to find opportunities to do that, and this we'll be watching for one of the things we expect to happen, and happen with greater rapidity during college than any other time, is the matter of the development of personal maturity. A level of maturity considerably above that which you have just left. It has to happen, because you have responsibilities now that never before were yours, and if you do not assume them and discharge them, then pretty soon you're hopeless. Now, as the term moves along, you'll see different things happening in the groups of which you're a part. There will be students making appointments with their professors along about the 10th week. For what? Well, they say, well, Professor so-and-so, I know I'm in trouble. I'm on the margin. Now, what can I do extra to make up for this deficiency? And you know, this is rather aggravating. There is nothing extra you can do. If you're really in trouble, you haven't done the minimum required. And so you're not about ready to take on any extras. Your job is to meet the requirements, at least the minimum requirements, of that which you're already in. Think about that before you approach that person. There will be those who will say, well, things have been going so rough for me, I'd like to take an incomplete and complete it later in another term. Your professors aren't even permitted to consider this, except in dire emergency. And by that I mean if you're in an automobile wreck, or you're hospitalized, or you're under surgery, and you can't finish a term. These are the only ways in which this can be done. There's no use to entertain that thought at all, because even if your professor wanted to, he isn't permitted to give that kind of consideration. Now you say, well, gee, is it really this tough? Are you just seeing how difficult you can be? No. Not at all. If it were a matter of toughness, we could simply teach above you all the time. Choose areas that you haven't the background for, and then get on in them and lose you completely. It isn't hard to even get lost ourselves sometimes. That isn't the point. It's the matter of developing this personal responsibility and maturity, and to develop within you discipline of your own. The only good thing we can do, well, let me say first of all what we can't do. We cannot give you an education. Even though it may appear at times that your professor is trying to, he cannot simply pour information into you. He can only lead you in an efficient manner toward the achieving or the learning of whatever it is you seek to learn. But the learning itself depends upon you, and this does take a self-discipline of your own. Our only end product of any value is the extent to which we have taught you how to learn, that it may continue for every year that you live. There is no terminal education anymore.
Thank you, Dean Bell. Indeed, I think whatever your background is, your ultimate test in terms of the success of education is your ability to carry forward your own further education. I liked your comment, too, in terms of punctuality. We might keep in mind, I think there's a West Point adage that says, do it quickly, do it rightly, do it now. Seems to me this would be a good keynote in terms of punctuality, in terms of assignments, as well as in attendance. Why don't we develop this antipathy business? I think that Dean Bell certainly has given a wonderful springboard for this. Dr. Bennett, what antipathy do you have in terms of things you see that students do that you don't like in terms of the classroom?
I think the main one that would occur to me would be the student who disagrees fundamentally and violently with what I'm saying, but who ignores me, who doesn't disagree with me, who simply sits and patiently lets me get by this so that I'll go away and won't bother him anymore. Because it seems to me that it's that there should be room in college classrooms for disagreement, and that unless students voice disagreements, there's no way for the students' ideas to be examined with the help of the instructor, no way for them to change. And I think there are a couple of other points I'd like to make here. The first one is that instructors are fallible. I made a mistake once. Let's see, it was in 1959. Instructors are fallible. They're sometimes wrong, and if you feel as a student that you have a valid basis for disagreement, I think then it's part of your right and responsibility within the limits of courtesy and sensing the tolerance of your instructor for this sort of thing to do this. There's a second thing I'd like to say in connection with this, which is that it bothers me when students don't distinguish between opinion and evidence. Where you look at an area where there is research, where there is evidence, where the evidence is fairly clear-cut, and they respond to this airily by saying, I don't believe it, or it's all a matter of opinion. Now, I'm very firmly committed that everybody can have their own opinions. They can have the fifth freedom, the freedom to be wrong. But I think it's important for you students to recognize when you simply believe something because you want to believe it, and when you have some basis for believing it. And it's these sort of things, I think, as much as anything else, that, if you'll pardon the phrase, bug me as an instructor.
I think we're all after, as Dr. Easton indicated a minute ago, and you reiterate here, this clear mind, this open mind, the inquiring mind. You know, people don't think of your instructors as necessarily, as I think you softened it somewhat there, as being necessarily the voice from Olympus. I mean, look upon your faculty as being, well, I hate to use the phrase again, but this friendliness. These are people who are your friends. These are people with whom you can be sincere. Before them, you can think aloud. Yes, you can even digress, and if there's reason to disagree, you certainly can disagree, as long as you permit us a chance to perhaps defend some of our viewpoints. Dr. Easton, another antipathy, possibly.
I was thinking that really I don't have any strong feelings or any looming antipathies to speak of. I am conscious of a number of kind of trivial things that bother me a little bit. For instance, when a student comes up and says, I was absent yesterday, what did you do in class? And I give some remark like, well, we discussed Greek art during the 5th century. And they said, would you tell me about it? Well, I'm not about to give another hour lecture for this one student, obviously. This would be inefficient. That's a little annoying. Another one is when a student comes in and said, you know, you flunked me last quarter, and this has caused me to be on probation. I say, well, how did you do in English? And he said, I passed. Well, you know, you flunked me, I passed. Doesn't that seem kind of funny? Either you flunked me and you passed me, or I flunked or I passed, but not you flunked and I passed. I can't get with that one, you know. Another thing, actually, it's impossible for me to flunk anyone out of school all alone. I don't have you for that many courses. You flunk yourself out of school in the first place, and even if it were within the power, if my flunking was of such strength that it would flunk you out, I couldn't do it alone. You have to flunk. I believe you have to flunk 2 courses anyway in order to be really flunked out, unless you're in very sad shape. So I don't feel that I flunk anybody. When I grade papers, I see myself as a kind of human IBM machine that's merely checking, almost like an automaton, the right from the wrong answers. That's all I'm doing, and then I write down at the top of the page how many were wrong and how many were right. I was quite mechanical. I don't flunk, I just record, do you see?
You get the picture.
Yeah, you got it. So, anytime you'd like to discuss this further, I have office hours, and we can find out who flunked who and how all this happened.
Thank you. Dr. Sutton.
Now, this discussion reminds me of what happened when the ant was walking along and a human came along and stepped on one of his feelers, and he says, "Bug, that mans me." But I don't know if you heard that before or not. There are lots of things that, of course, I don't like, but really what I think you should understand that all of these things that we don't like are related to things that we do like, and they should be turned around. And I think what my friends here have been saying, think about the situation. I thought, Roger, you were going to tell about the student who came in the next day and said, "Did anything happen yesterday?" And at least he gave you credit. He says, "Something must have happened. What was it? I want it given to me. I want 50 minutes worth of discussion in 2 minutes, but at least I'll give you credit that you did have 2 minutes worth." That's one thing, and now anybody with any sense wouldn't like that. You wouldn't like it if somebody pulled that on you, and so naturally we don't like it. Most of the things that we don't like about classroom participation are things that you wouldn't like either. Suppose you fell asleep in class. You ought to have sense enough to know that nobody would like to have someone fall asleep right in his face. I should say that if you're sleepy, don't come to class. And, don't be sleepy. That's pretty obvious, too. Anybody with any sense knows that 3 hours of sleep a night isn't enough, but some people have to be told this in a rather elaborate way, and all of this is really time-wasting, In other words, it's pretty much juvenility. I think the one basic thing that I would like to express is that I'd like to feel that the student understood that we're supposed to be a team, trying to get something accomplished. I didn't go into teaching because I disliked students or college life or education. I'm a teacher basically because I love the whole procedure. I think it's a marvelously good way to spend a large portion of your life, and I'm just delighted that there is something like this that I can like so much to do. So when I go into the classroom, I'm not intending to be the natural enemy of every student that comes along. I sometimes, in an exuberant moment, say, "I love my students," and I get in a lot of trouble, because people misinterpret it. But that really is my basic attitude. I like people generally, and I have a very distinct, though highly controlled, emotional investment in my students' futures. I hope every one of them is extremely successful in any good endeavor that he might have. And as I told you before, I think a person ought to come to college because he's trying to do something to better himself and therefore the society he's in. And it just makes me quite irritated when I realize that I have hold of a student who simply has no conception of this. A student ought to bring into the classroom a positive attitude of making his contribution to the achievement of good aims with the least possible waste motion.
Dean Bell.
Well, I'd underwrite these as things I don't like. This thing of "did you do anything while I was gone" certainly would be high on the list. But, there's something a little different from that always kind of delights me. Occasionally in a class you'll find that person who, when others don't have the answers, he has them. And yet, when you do your testing and you do your daily work even, he isn't always that outstanding. And you know, this is kind of a little red light that says, here's a spark of genius being unused. Well, I don't like to have sparks of unused genius. But I do love to find these people who are producing under their capacity and putting them under threat. You don't get a C by earning a C. If you have that ability, I'm not going to give it to you. You ought to be earning an A. And so I think some of my best friends in the alumni from Ball State are those who, by one way or another, I discovered were not producing nearly so well as they should, and who under this encouragement, and really you can't be insulted by saying you're too smart to be producing at this level, but those who have been pushed forward to make the effort to do something of which they are capable are those then who really appreciate that kind of help, and these are the kinds of people I like to find.
After being here 3 days, I'm beginning to think that we should have a television program titled Faculty Panel or something, and this could be sponsored by Crest. This would be the 21%, I think, out here.
We're looking for holes.
Hope not in the head, though. Yesterday, we opened the floor for question. Well, I should say we did all 3 days. The fact of the thing is that on Tuesday, of course, Monday we didn't have questions. We didn't have a panel that day. Tuesday, we didn't receive a question. Yesterday, we received one question from the floor, and we've been hoping and praying we could increase that 100%, and we're looking for 2 questions from the floor. Do we have questions here?
Did you plan anybody?
No, I forgot.
This is entirely unrehearsed.
This is totally unrehearsed. Do we have a question there?
Please.
Oh, there's excellent. Very good. There's a potential A student. Your question, sir.
Would you explain something about the lectures and how they should be used for the textbook?
That's your question.
We answered the question yesterday. It's good here tomorrow.
How should the lectures be?
Do you want me
It
to...
varies, I think, from class to class. I think you can get 5 answers here.
Yeah.
Let's begin with Dr. Sutton.
Well, I think I understand your question. I don't think he did. In other words, what you want to know is whether the lecture should be a recapitulation of the textbook, or whether it should be a stimulation for you to read the textbook or something else. Now, am I anywhere near what you thought? Yeah. Okay, because every once in a while I hear some students say, "Why? We never even covered the textbook in class." And you've been taught, or possibly led to expect, a kind of pattern in high school where we feel you're given an easier task, that it will be a recapitulation, and there'll be questions which will go back and forth over the textbook. Now, by and large, and I don't know what everybody else is doing, of course, but I remember my own experience, and I know what I do myself. I do not expect to do the student's job for him. Instead, I think my function is to help him to get it done, either through some kind of leadership or stimulation or guidance or something of that sort. But if I ask you to read chapters 2 to 6, I don't expect to read it for you and then give you a capsule opinion of what it was about. Does that meet your question? I mean, that does deal with the subject you were interested in, doesn't it?
He's nodding yes. Good, we've answered that question. Is there another question? Another question?
We have one to go.
We have one to go, just one to go, just one question. Well, I'll tell you, I'll suggest one out there. Why doesn't someone ask, what do you think about attendance? That's always a good question. You ask. What do you think about attendance? Yeah, ask it. That's all right. Very good. Very good. We appreciate that. Very good. Thank you. What do you think about attendance? Why don't we go right down the row here? Dean Bell.
I'm for it.
He's for it.
Are you for it, Carson?
Yes, I'm for
Are
it.
you for attendance? For it.
We're all for it.
We don't require it at Ball State. We simply demand it. We're very free in our thinking on it. I have one antipathy I want to bring out. Oh, here's another question. 3 questions. I won't bypass that.
This is a new intercollegiate record.
Yes, sir.
What do you think about notes? Should you rewrite them right after class or go over?
Oh, yes. Oh, I think that's an excellent idea, really. I can reflect on this. It took me about one semester catch on to this. I think this is an excellent idea, an excellent immediate review. I think that's an excellent idea. I used to retype mine, or used to not retype mine. I didn't take a typewriter to class with it. I used to type them. No, I think that's an excellent idea. That's an excellent suggestion too.
This shows you the differing calibers of the professors. It took me 4 years to learn that. It took them 1 semester, so it's just an idea that we differ a little.
Well, it's not what you think you are. It's what. Let's see. It's not maybe. You may not be what you think you are, but what you think you are, Bill.
Well, thanks a lot.
This depends, though. There's something here, too, in what kind of notes you take. How good a note taker are you? And you may find that it just helps you so much to rewrite and to get more ideas in than you can write while it's happening. As you go along, there ought to be less and less of this necessary.
I think seriously, it's hard for me to talk seriously about notes, but I think seriously that everyone will get his own system. And I know I went through quite a period in college of using different systems and probing, and finally when I got to graduate school, I got what I felt was the system that satisfied me. But I'm sure everybody displays a great deal of individuality in regard to this.
Right.
I think the thing you're suggesting is an excellent idea because it does provide a kind of pre-review for tests. If you do this, you'll find that when it comes time to study for a test, it won't be as hard to refresh the notes in your mind. And when you get to a test and use some technique like reading a page of notes and closing your notebook and seeing if you can remember the main points, you find it'll be easier than it was if you hadn't rewritten them. I think it's a very good idea.
Speaking of antipathies, I think one of mine in this area is the guy who says, "Oh, I never take notes because I recall everything I hear." That's a lot of bunk.
You're going to find there's a lot of that on this campus, I think. Not only on this campus,
lot of
but
bunk?
on... No, well, yeah. Something you might find that, too. But you find these iconoclasts that roam the halls and depreciate, shall we say, are you going to attend that convocation? This is one thing that I wanted to get in here today. Are you going to attend that convocation? Don't bother. It's not worth your time. People, this is part of your education. I recalled the story yesterday of a distinguished journalist that we had on campus this past year. A few weeks prior to his arrival, we had this individual by the name of Vincent Price, and we're losing one of our panel members. It's not that long a story either, really. But the journalist remarked, we had a full house for Vincent Price. For this very distinguished journalist, we had 200 people present. This is, I think, the 30% cavity group. And his remark after the convocation was, "What do you have on this campus? A beatnik colony?" Now, this was the message that he took from Ball State. Ball State, oh, they never turn out for convocations. A beatnik colony there. Of course, some of us define beatniks, as people who think they're really gone, when probably, in my judgment, they've only been half here to begin with. But at the same time, I think take advantage of these programs. This is a wonderful opportunity. The programs, I know not all of them are going to be excellent. You're not going to hear William Jennings Bryan every day. No, we wouldn't want to, would we? No.
Not the way he is now.
No, he's dead, now. But take advantage of these things. We have time for one more question. Here we have a question. Yes?
My roommate has suggested that it's a good idea to take a history if you have a history for your class. Do you think it's a good idea?
I can react right away on that.
Go ahead. I have some very strong feelings.
Right here.
I know that students do this sort of thing or are interested in doing it. I have my own feelings can be put very simply. I'm opposed to it. And I'll explain why. And it's this, that I think that if a person is going to write something and put it in a book or in an article, then the person writes in a careful and documented and precise way, which is not characteristic of the sort of informal thing you do in classes, particularly if you have questions asked. And I don't think that my own reaction, they may disagree, that's all right. My own reaction is that I don't think that instructors should be put in the position of having to have their informal presentations recorded in this fashion.
Excellent. I think I would endorse that completely.
Roger, you?
I think this is a kind of an odious idea because in time it will present to the professor the idea of recording his lectures. You can sit in an empty hall and listen to the radio if that's what you want. If you want to miss the give and take and the byplay and the entertainment and the wit and charm of your professor, you can turn on the radio anytime you want to. It seems to me you're missing a great part of college if you're going to let a machine do your work I like to watch a student take notes with an aggressive state of mind. I like to see him sit up, and I like to see him hot for the information, frankly. And I like to see the sparks fly out of that pencil when these great pearls roll out.
The very act of deciding what to put down. You don't put everything down. You don't put down good morning usually. But the very act of deciding what to put down is in itself a form of learning, of sorting through what the professor is saying and trying to pick out the points that are worthwhile putting down.
I wouldn't have any objection to it, and therefore I suggest that whoever the person is, just check with the professor, because you can see some might not like it and some might not care. So I don't happen to be concerned about any of the things that they mentioned. So it's just to illustrate the fact that you will get differing reactions. I saw another question there.
He gets residuals, though. We don't.
Yeah, I bet.
Each student try to make it a point to meet each of his professors.
Dr. Easton. He had an immediate reaction.
No, I don't think so. I've had 2 classes of 200 students each and a third class with over 80. And in the days when education wasn't such a big thing as it is, I could meet a number of my students, but I can't any longer. In fact, I have 200 students sitting over in recital hall right now, so I'm going to leave right now. I can't take the time to meet all my students, and merely meeting them isn't quite enough. I mean, just shaking their hands and say, how do you do, doesn't do the job as far as human relationships go. It's either got to be more than that or less, I'm afraid.
Is there another comment on that, Dr.
Well,
Bennett?
I too teach large classes, and I think this is where the problem becomes most acute. I have one class I report of 200. In this connection, I think it's important for me to meet and talk with people whom I can help in some way, to whom I can be of assistance. I'm perfectly happy to meet other people on a social, conversational basis, but I think the crucial thing is, do I get to meet the ones for whom it would be some benefit?
Then perhaps after this somewhat solemn fare today, we can recall for a final time probably one of the wisest things we've heard recently was Thurber's remark that everybody's getting too grim these days. People take these words to heart. Be of good cheer. It's an exciting time to be alive. It's a wonderful and exciting time to attend Ball State Teachers College. In many ways, we envy you, and of course, we hope you never have a dull moment. We thank you for your patience and your attention and your questions.